All right, perfect. Appreciate all of you being here for our newest CASP conversation webinar. I'll try and keep an eye on the waiting room and get people in here in a timely manner. So we do these webinars a few times a year. It's great for our members. We love offering this service for you. We also really encourage y'all to invite your colleagues to these webinars as well, especially because it's a great way for us to advertise, CASP and our events and Texas CRLA and Texas NCLC, Texas CRLA and Texas NOS to everybody. So what we have for you today is our special guest, Drew Landry. He's an assistant professor of government at South Plains College in Lubbock, Texas, where he brings a passion for civic education and public discourse to the classroom. Holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Evansville and a master's from the University of Rhode Island. Beyond teaching, Landry is a frequent political commentator, contributing columns to outlets such as the Lubbock Avalanche Journal, the Amarillo Globe News, and appearing in media, including the Texas Tribune and local news stations. Also hosts the Outsider podcast, which I believe at some point you'll probably give us a link to that in the chat if you want. Where he explores political and cultural topics with a West Texas perspective. So we're here today to talk about some of the things happening at the legislative session, especially those that might be impacting us in higher ed. So without further ado, thank you, Drew, for being here. I'll let you take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, and thank you, CASP, for inviting me, and it's great. It's just a great honor to discuss a couple of things here dealing with academic freedom. And so, again, I'm very thankful for that, and I hope you enjoy this presentation. And I'll have a moment at the end. I've budgeted some time in this presentation for some questions, and so if you see anything here that you want to ask about or anything like that, just write that down. Hold on to it until we get to the end, and we'll have a good Q&A session. So, all right, and let me see. Can I do that? Is this working? No. Oh no.
Yeah, no, we see it. You can just
Oh, there we go. Okay. So a couple of things here about me is when it comes to giving this sort of information, I need to make a couple of disclaimers about what we're doing here. Is that I am going to be purely analytical in this presentation, okay? If it comes off that I'm, bashing one political party over the other, please know that I'm not really doing that. I'm not doing that at all, really. It's just the fact that when we call balls and strikes, when we're being analytical, when we're being analysts, and we're being that umpire, a strike is a strike, a ball is a ball. And for some people, that is fair and down the line. Others don't really like when they're being called that. But I want you to understand that that has nothing to do with my own personal politics. Me doing, analysis is not an indictment of that, as opposed to my professionalism as an academic and as an analyst. So as we go through this, you may say, "Oh my gosh, he's doing one thing over the other." That's not what I'm doing. I'm just telling you what's there and what has happened. And so really I'm dedicated to my professionalism, and because I value that much more than I do my own personal thoughts on really any sort of topic. That's how I am inside the classroom. And so my students and our students deserve to know the accurate information. That's exactly what you deserve in this presentation. And so I'm not convincing you of anything. I'm not a politician. I'm not campaigning to you. So it's good for us to know the historical patterns as to what's happened, in other sessions, and what maybe has led to this session, what has led to discussing these issues that have come up, and what they mean for the present time and possibly even the future. So that said, let's get into what academic freedom is. Okay, so we're trying to figure out, trying to analyze here, assess how this last session, particularly with a couple of bills, affected academic freedom. So before we get into that part, let's also understand what academic freedom is. We all heard it, we probably know what it is, but this definition here coming from the American Association of University Professors is going to tell us here that it's essentially what we will teach, what we will research, what we will publish, what we'll discuss in class without any sort of interference. Okay, whether it's from an administrator, whether it's from a donor or a board of trustee or board of regents or any sort of other entity out there that we are utilizing the best things for us, for our students and for our classrooms without any sort of outside static. And so we need to also remember that that's just not what academic freedom is. It protects the right of the faculty to speak freely when participating in what's known as institutional governance. So you don't like what's happening inside your institution, you have the ability to address that issue or go to a board of regents meeting and to discuss that, as well as talking to media, writing and having a column or something like that. That's speaking freely as a citizen. And so, with that in mind, what I've done here is, along with the AAUP's website, is we've kind of broken this down here into 4 elements, and you can see what we're looking at here, just kind of breaking down that bigger definition, where the elements of academic freedom have to do with in the teaching field of discussing all relevant matters inside that classroom. Now we have the freedom to explore all aspects of our scholarship. I mean, research is such a big deal to where we are because we continue to learn. I mean, just because we're at this level doesn't mean that we stop learning. We have to continue to ask questions. We have to test those questions. And so that's just part of what we're doing here so that we can continue the scholarship and just never stop learning. And so that's a big aspect of academic freedom and being able to publish those things, publish those findings. And an interesting term here is called intramural speech. Anytime I think of intramurals, I think of like the sports that you played in college. But intramural speech, things, again, just things that are happening in your own institution, So again, whether it's with faculty senate, whether it's with a board of regents meeting, that you have the capabilities to go to somebody and to discuss, what that issue is. And you can do so without any fear of being reprimanded or anything of the sort. And extramural speech here, meaning that you're talking to other entities as a professional, whether it's like the media or writings or anything like that. So I wanted to spend just a few moments here just kind of with this working definition to establish this working definition of academic freedom, excuse me, so that we can all have an understanding as to what it is that we're really trying to see if this last session it established an infringement upon that. So that's a big deal. We needed to really know what all that we're talking about. So one other thing I wanted to also bring in here is that what academic freedom doesn't mean. So does it mean that a professor can do whatever you want? Well, the answer is no. All right. We are subject to certain expectations and responsibilities, such as our ethics. We have to be ethical in our teaching and in our research. Here in Lubbock, we have a lot. We have some busy roads, and if I felt that I had a hypothesis that if you just ran across this really busy road without looking, you could make it, I can't use another human subject to test this hypothesis. That's not ethical in any sense. So academic freedom doesn't cover that. All right. Let's also note, it's a neat little way to add to the extra point here, is that we have to be competent in what we're doing. All right. We owe it to our students, to our institution, and to our discipline to make sure that we are competent in what we're doing. And so peer review is a very important aspect of our profession. And so we have to be able to be held in check by our peers. And so by other faculty letting us know that we're off base or you need improvement, whatever the case may be, that we are dedicated to having that sort of professional competence. And we also hold a responsibility to the collective, meaning our department or our college or whatever. So what we are responsible for a course of study that may share the responsibility for determining courses. All right, we just can't do what we want that's just for us. I mean, if there's a good opportunity out there for faculty to lower the cost of a book or lower cost of an ebook, what we are responsible for is setting aside our own desire to use book A and coincide with others and to make that sacrifice so that we can have a lower book price for book B. So this is, academic freedom doesn't mean we get to do whatever that we want. We have to be upheld to certain ethics and competence and other responsibilities. So I just wanted to make that clear that it doesn't mean we get to do whatever that we want. So when we talk about academic freedom and we talk about this past legislative session, there were two bills that garnered a lot of attention in really by those in academia. And those two bills were Senate Bill 37 and Senate Bill 412. And so for Senate Bill 37, here's what it did. It will remove the ability for professors to choose curricula without oversight from administrative leaders, as the Board of Regents would have the final say. All right. It's also going to reduce the size and influence of faculty senates, as it requires half of their members to be appointed by the university president rather than being elected. And any member would be subject to removal if they use their position for any sort of advocacy. So we got two big issues here already that are dealing with the academic freedom. And here comes a third point here for SB 37, is that the Board of Regents are going to be required to approve hiring of more administrators as opposed to just those at the top. So instead of them just only approving or only hiring like the college president or any other vice president or anything like that, there's going to be other administrators your college or university will have that the Board of Regents will have to get more involved. This will also create an office that's led by a gubernatorial, which that's a fun word. It means governor. So someone who's been appointed by the governor to ensure schools are complying with this new law. And if they're not, they could risk some state funding. So, this is particularly important because of how schools like South Plains College and Western Texas College and other junior and community colleges are funded now through student learning achievement. And this is a new mechanism for funding as opposed to in enrollment. So this could possibly put some risk if we don't follow this into a lot of our funding. So quite the eyebrow raising aspect here. And this also requires, let's also know this, the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, the THECB, to establish an advisory committee that would review the general education requirements statewide now, okay, and be responsible for considering methods for condensing the number of general education curriculum courses required. So what this means is the THECB will be able to just review the entire general education requirements, and then say, you know what, maybe we don't need so many classes for this general ed curriculum. Um, Typically, people would be in favor of that. Students would say, okay, great, I don't have to take so many classes of this elective or whatever or whatever. But you can also understand how this can cause a lot of consternation. All right. And then we have here where colleges and universities would be required to review minors and certificate programs every 5 years now to identify programs with low enrollment that may require consolidation or elimination. So I take this as thinking that if you had like a music appreciation course that may have had 7 or 8 people in it, 7 or 8 students, and then you had an art appreciation course that may have had 7 or 8 students in it, this sort of analysis or evaluation would say, well, that's a low enrollment course. We don't really need one per anymore. Let's just put them all together and we can have music art appreciation. Or if it's a behavioral science, or if it's a computer studies, or you get the idea. All right. Any sort of a class that is a minor and that might have any sort of certificate program, you could possibly see where that would have low enrollment, that they could be combined or even eliminated from the course, from the school. That's SB 37. A couple things here about SB 412. SB 412 is really looking at a lot of our public schools and a lot of our libraries. And so what this particularly did, and it applies to us also, this also needs to be said, that it removes legal protections for adults who provide material to children that could be considered harmful. Now, harmful in a sense of maybe too violent, or what is often called, some would even say that would be sexually explicit material, so, or obscene. And you can understand why this is of quite concern, because what is obscene to one may not be obscene to another. What's harmful to one may not be viewed harmful to another. The other part of SB 14 is that it eliminates any sort of legal protection for individuals charged with sexual performance by a child, which means that a child is encouraged by an adult to do an actual sexual conduct. Nobody really, just a little quick note here, when it came to this portion of SB 14, nobody was arguing against that. Okay, so when we look at these two particular bills of SB 37 and SB 412, where were they? Well, both bills passed the legislature. Both of them passed. And the governor signed them into law. So Governor Greg Abbott signed them into law. So they will become law by September 1st, on or before. What do these laws do to academic freedom, and why did they happen? So let's first look at the effect, and then I'll get into the why. So these two bills are an affront to academic freedom, all right? And the social and behavioral sciences are under a microscope, as are the arts. And some examples here, your music, your literature, your theater, filmmaking, are all going to come under a great deal of a microscope, and with a lot of zeroing in on, because there are those in the legislature, those in the executive branch, who may say that we don't need to have classes on music history, or we don't need a class on human sexual behavior, or we don't need a class on minority studies, or you shouldn't take two governments, you should just take one, or you shouldn't take two histories, or you shouldn't have these other types of histories, and you have to have particular news standards to meet here. So this is why these are coming under a sense of criticism or being looked at sternly, because there are those who think these classes just simply are not necessary. All right. So, what does enforcement of these new laws really look like? Well, I have to ask some questions here because that's really how I have to answer it. So, does the approval of curricula by the Board of Regents mean that we have to have our syllabi approved? So, in other words, will the Board of Regents have to approve our syllabi? And within that syllabi, you'll probably have your required readings. And therefore, does that mean that they are also subject to the Board of Regents? Could they be rejected? That's part of the enforcement aspect. And then I think of what could possibly be next. You know, would our exams need to be approved by the Board of Regents? Would our cluster activities inside the classroom need to be examined and approved? What if we want to bring in guest speakers? Any sort of activities that you want to do, are your lectures? I mean, you know, are we going to face outside scrutiny for talking about things that need to be discussed? And then we also look here for 412, for SB 412, will there suddenly be a book person to monitor all of these complaints and actions? Well, I, in a sense, answered my own question because there's another bill that came up. It's called SB 13. It was actually passed and it's sitting on the governor's desk as we speak, where it would have the school boards to create another board of parents to do exactly what this is saying here, to investigate complaints and investigate approved readings or books that are accepted, to make sure that that they've had parental approval. So looks like the answer to that last point there for 412 is there's going to be book people. And so that's what I think of when we really get into the threats of academic freedom. That the best way I can really answer those questions is to ask questions. And when we think about this even further, will these sort of things be covered in liability insurance with associations? Maybe they already are. You know, I'm a member of the Texas Community College Teachers Association. You know, I pay every year for liability insurance, just full disclosure there. And I think it's interesting is, will they have to expand that coverage into this, or is there something in the wording that's so broad in the policy that would already cover this? Would those in the secondary and primary education have to get this sort of insurance as well? So lots of unanswered questions, lots of concern here, and that's where I'm leading is, you know, what does this look like as we try to make it real, as we, you know, as we enforce this? You can make all the laws you want. How is it going to be enforced? And these are some questions that we can really ask here. Okay, so let's look here at SB 37 and how it's going to affect faculty senates. So according to SB 37, Board of Regents gets to decide if a faculty senate will even exist. Okay. They get to actually decide if your college gets to have one, if your university gets to have one, and that the body cannot be any larger. The maximum size, and this is in the bill, can't be any larger than 60 spots. All right. So your faculty senate can have no more than 60 people, 60 senators. The college president or the university president will be able to appoint half the body. So that's really unprecedented, because usually it's a lot more than 60, and you know, of course, depending on the size of the university and the college. But when you think about what type of influence that they used to have, well, that's going to be severely limited. And the college and university presidents never really had to appoint anybody. They never appointed anybody. They were always elected by those departments. Now, under SB 37, half get appointed, half will be elected. This will affect the agenda and the progress on issues for faculty senates. Now, this may bring in larger influence from university and college presidents. Will faculty members feel like their voice is being heard? That's a key concern here. Let's also understand that SB 37 brings out term limits for faculty senators. And this is why this is such, a lot of eyebrow raising here, because those who are elected to the faculty senate have a 2-year term. Those that are elected by the president, appointed by the president, get a 6-year term. And then you got to sit out 2 years in order you can come back in and do it again. So the power here is going to be incredibly small. And so while the power exists here for, to completely rid of faculty senates and diminish the voice of all that, this is what I want us to really think about the reality of it. How active will the college president and university president be concerning a faculty senate? So I'm unsure, honestly, as to how many college and university presidents are just salivating, or incredible that they're salivating so much because they've been so worried about faculty senates. So that they could either get rid of them, or if they keep them, we can appoint half the body. While the power exists, I'm just reminded as to, faculty senates are just, yes, they're there to represent, and they're there for people to bring in that intramural, that intergovernance voice, but they're not like a big powerful teachers union, or they're not some like AFL-CIO union endorsed entity. And so a lot of our leaders have those conflated. The two are being confused for one another. That, well, if you have a faculty senate, uh-oh. So, but let's understand here, while we can really ask here, is this, are college presidents really going to be that concerned about this? My gut feeling, and that's all I can give you, is a gut feeling, is that a lot of them are going to roll their eyes and just realize, man, I got more stuff to do. You're making me do this. And so I don't know how thrilled they're actually going to be about a whole lot of that. So I also want to spend a little bit of time here on SB 412. And how will that affect teaching? So let's understand one thing that this does, and this is a big deal, is that it removes what's called the affirmative defense protections that were held by educators, parents, and doctors. The only ones who can keep them, the only ones who can have affirmative defense protections are law enforcement and judges. Okay. So what is that? Affirmative defense was if you were doing something that was of educational purpose, you couldn't be prosecuted, you couldn't be sued or anything like that, because you could say, well, there's an actual value to what you're doing. Now, if someone believes that a child is subject to harmful or obscene material by an educator, a doctor, a parent, they can now be prosecuted. All right. Now let's understand what is being zeroed in on here. There is no question that within the crosshairs, they're going after books in school libraries. Okay. This isn't anything new for the last few sessions here. This has been an ongoing thing, is that, and you've heard these arguments before. I'm not saying anything that you probably haven't heard already, but the whole argument is to keep the smut, sexually explicit or violent materials out of school libraries. Okay. And when it comes to politics, it's all about, framing the whole conversation. How do you how do you defend keeping smut in there? But that's not. You have to reframe that whole debate about, well, you're wanting to get rid of books, and so when it comes to this, it's all about reframing the whole conversation, which is why we're seeing this happening at the school library. This whole conversation about these particular publications that some view are harmful or obscene. What's interesting here is that there are a lot of classic books, a lot of classics that could possibly be viewed as harmful or obscene, could fall right under this. And I give you some examples here. I mean, Grapes of Wrath is a fantastic book. Of Mice and Men, that's also another great book. Um, you also look at, dealing with a graphic novel like V for Vendetta or even Mouse. I mean, even the state of Tennessee banned the use of mouse. So this is an interesting umbrella that is being opened here, because harmful and obscene are very broad terms. And so we also need to look at, what about the classical pieces like Shakespeare? When we look at Romeo and Juliet, or you look at Othello, or Twelfth Night. I mean, you got a lot of these um, classical Shakespeare pieces that you may have read in high school at some point. And there's talk of things that could be obscene or harmful in there. What about pieces from Ralph Waldo Emerson or Henry David Thoreau? Is the transcendental movement going to be on alert as well? So I think what this is end up going to do, when we talk about how it affects teaching, teachers, educators are going to have to be vigilant and honestly about the whole compliance. Um, Again, this is my assessment of how this will affect teaching, and I love to use English literature because there's so many great books that add wonderful value to our society and to our vocabulary, and yes, and even to the great academic achievements. And so I give you the idea here that, perhaps teachers need to send a notification. I mean, this could possibly be the effect of this, that teachers need to send a notification to parents or guardians, maybe even bring back a permission slip to say, hey, we're going to read Othello, and it discusses interracial romantic relationships. Or you could, say Julius Caesar, and it talks about violence in there, because we all know how Caesar meets his end. Okay, so the freedom teachers once enjoyed to choose books and have creative lesson plans and try to, garner the attention of students through, imagination and innovation inside the classroom, essentially are going to be gone. And SB 412 is going to be a big part of that. Okay. And so now that's the first part. Now let's look at the why. Why did this happen? Now, again, this is part of my my disclaimer at the beginning of this whole conversation, of this whole presentation, is that I call balls and strikes. And so, this is just how it is. Conservatives, those in the conservative movement, have long held a skeptical sense about universities, colleges, and even the professors who are in there. They tend to have this idea that there's a liberal bias and conservative ideas are being suppressed by these liberal professors, and you have to be very skeptical, and we're indoctrinating and we're doing all these terrible things. Um, uh, So this is not a new thing. This has been
Get
the
out of there.
yeah, this is not a new thing. Um, so this has been the mindset for about 50 years. Okay, so that's part of it. What else is part of it is since the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic, there's been a push to regulate what was called the woke agenda. All right. And you remember this. You remember this, when we were home after spring break or even before spring break of the spring of 2020, we did asynchronous learning or remote learning or whatever the case may be, and parents started to see what their children were learning, and they're like, hey, wait a second, what's what's going on here? And then you heard about the inclusion of critical race theory and diversity, equity, and inclusion being involved. And this is, again, raised the alarms that higher education is problematic. Let's also understand that it got a little personal for Lieutenant Governor Patrick because regulating higher education became a big thing for him about two years ago. All right, there was a Texas A&M medical professor was accused of criticizing him in a guest lecture. The ongoing guest lecture series it happened every year, and what happened was, at least the report was, is that the lands commissioner's daughter was in the room, was in the lecture. She made a little jab about the lieutenant governor. She tells her mother. Her mother tells Lieutenant Governor Patrick. Lieutenant Governor Patrick then calls his friend, who was chancellor of the A&M systems by the name of John Sharp, and then this professor is going to be on leave. So this became a bit of a vendetta for Lieutenant Governor Patrick after that happened, especially doing the whole faculty senates and looking at that. Let's also understand that the protests that we saw on a lot of college campuses, um, dealing with the U.S.-Israeli actions in Gaza, really put on a lot of alarms for those in power. Governor Abbott was very adamant about wanting to regulate this sort of conversation. All right. Of course, this is happening in the wake of the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel, and so you have these protests taking place. Like one that really made national news was at UT Austin, and you had people, being arrested and sent to prison for their actions there. So it's becoming a bigger political prize at this moment. Now, let's also not be naive to think that the 2024 election was not anything short of a conservative victory. I mean, when you see the reelection of President Donald Trump, you have Ted Cruz wins reelection. You have the House Republicans in the Texas legislature gain 2 seats. The Texas Senate gains a seat. The political tea leaves are quite clear. I mean, that was a conservative victory, and it just you couple all that, all right, the frustration that the movement has had with universities, the idea that they need to regulate a lot of these education policies. The time's ripe. The time is now. And just to be clear, I mean, all in all, it's a misunderstanding of higher education. I mean, I make this statement quite often, and y'all are free to agree or disagree with it. But if we are indoctrinating students, then we're not doing a very good job of it because we wouldn't need to have like signs in the restroom to remind students to flush the toilets and to wash their hands. So I have to always remind people that we're not doing a very good job, and I'll give them an assignment to read, and then there'll be a quiz, and not everyone does it. So we're not doing a very good job of indoctrinating anybody. But it's also the idea here, again, as I said earlier, about um, faculty senates. This ongoing thought that somehow faculty senates are like some sort of teacher union, or that they have some sort of collective bargaining power. They're just being conflated here. And so you don't really, these are those who don't really have a good understanding as to what's taking place. But I think one word is just going to sum it all up. It's politics. And so that's the reason that we saw these things take place, is a lot of it had to do with politics. Now, just to recap, what is academic freedom? Well, again, the ability of the teacher or the researcher to investigate, discuss, teach, publish, research without any sort of uh, interference. Okay, that there's that you can participate in your institution without without fear of being reprimanded, and you can speak freely as a citizen. Do SB 37 and 412 attack academic freedom as defined by AAUP and what I have used as this working definition? Without question. All right. Make no mistake about it. This is an absolute threat, an absolute attack on academic freedom. Because what these two bills do is they bring out an inherent interference from administrators, board of regents, politicians, by forcing academics to have curricula approved. That is interference by anyone's definition. By heavily regulating faculty senates, you're severely limiting the faculty's ability to participate in institutional governance and also freely speak as a citizen. We also need to understand that they're challenging these preconceived notions that through reading that through reading that may be challenged by parents and teachers could be sued. So just to what I mean by that is, and this is kind of no pun intended, they're judging a book by its cover. All right. Without actually reading what's in there. Again, just to make it clear, I mean, this plays upon the suspicion that academics have this nefarious agenda of indoctrinating students, and the political leaders are here to save the day. And it really does. I mean, if you could read those political tea leaves and you just won a pretty big election, um, it's good politics to attack attack higher education, attack education in general, than it is to really support it, right? It truly does. And they would rather question professional ethics and attack the profession than want to understand it. So this is a short recap of what I went over here with you. Just so we're clear, if you were curious as to where I got my information, here is my bibliography, my references there. If you're interested in all that, you can email me or get with me, and I'll gladly point you in those directions. And so now, with the time we have left, about 15 minutes or so, and I'll let anyone who needs to moderate this, I'll open up the floor to any questions that you might have.
I had a question. The way you phrased it is you said college presidents will be able to appoint. That doesn't mean that they have to appoint um, half of the faculty senators. I mean, I can't see them not doing it, but I'm wondering, is it really just they're able, or is there pressure for them to actually do it?
They have the ability. I don't know if they really will, because I mean, well, I think they're going to view it as a mandate that they have to do, that they're not thrilled about doing. So it's something that it's something that they're going to have to do. Yeah. But again, it's we have to remember that a lot of these faculty senates are not as powerful as people want to make them out to be, but it's our voice. It's our voice. And so my skepticism is how many college presidents are going to be thrilled about having to do this? Um, maybe maybe a handful. Thanks for the question. That's a really good question.
So I'm curious about the the school libraries.
Mm.
I know that it seems to mainly be targeting K-12, but of course, university libraries are also a school library, and as a public institution, children can come in and read books anytime they want, just like anyone else. So, are there going to be potential consequences for university libraries as well?
I believe so.
Mm,
I don't think it's just to one entity. The wording's pretty broad that it can be up to universities. Yeah, public libraries. Sure. I don't think it's just narrowly tailored just for K through 12. It's meant for K through 12.
right, right.
But yeah, I don't. It's there's other things involved in there that make it
Um,
more broad.
Yeah, and Christopher and Prue said, and to further blur matters, dual credit students, right? So you're in high school, and you're taking a college level course,
Yeah.
especially since English is, a very popular dual credit. Um, so yeah. Beatrice, I'll go ahead and read the question just for the recording. Asks, are there protections in place for professors teaching dual credit courses on SB 14? The coordinating board says these students are college students, but if they're under 18 and in my human sexuality course, what's the prevailing situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way I understand it is those who are taking a dual credit course are taking this for a college credit, so therefore they would be a college student. Um, I don't necessarily think that um, that's going to absolve you from a lot of things. So what I mean by that is, as to what someone else mentioned here in the chat, that it's going to further blur matters. Yeah, things got a little bit more blurry for dual credit. Um, if I was teaching dual credit, and this is I can only speak to me, I'd be extra careful. So because they could say, hey, I got to read this book that talks about you know stuff here. Um, and then now you're talking to parents and you're having meetings and then there's a whole conversation about dual credit. I mean, so this seems like Beatrice that's is a front that hasn't been explored by these lawmakers, and it's going to be at some point.
Shanna asks, who's the ultimate arbiter of what's obscene or inappropriate? So, what's compliance going to look like? Are we supposed to remove what we think might be challenged? I know, I think the Senate Bill 13 is the one that they're creating the parent committees.
That's right.
But for those of us in higher ed, are they going to be looking at higher ed books? Can anyone lodge a complaint?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as it works right now, um, having our through the board of regents um, approving the curricula, we are making the safe presumption that they are looking at what we are going to really do. And so if our curricula has been approved by the board of regents, then what kind of problems could we possibly face? It's been pre-approved, you know. So that's one idea that we can throw out there, because anything that we think is obscene, Well, the Board of Regents just approved it. So, I mean, hopefully you understand what I'm getting at here. So the ultimate arbiter of what's obscene and inappropriate is really going to be decided by how it's ultimately going to be used inside the classroom for higher education. I'm always of the mind the safer the better, but I'm also of the mind that if you know that this is how you teach the course and it's worked, why change? Um, you know, so and you can always rely on the fact that, hey, I submitted my syllabi, I submitted this curricula. The Board of Regents, who's elected in some areas and appointed by others, they approved it. So take it up with them. That would be my response. Yeah.
And then I think the second one of us makes that case, there will be an amendment to that statute that says that the Board of Regents are immune from any
Yeah.
oversight challenges.
No, that's exactly right. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of this is just like, they've opened up Pandora's box and they don't know what to expect. And now they're going to have these extra wrinkles and all this, and they're going to come back and try to have to fix it. And these lawmakers have really done something here.
Another question. So for the faculty Senate slash association requirements that um, limits them to the number of members to 60, will that also include community colleges?
Yes.
Mhm. Amanda has asked, do you anticipate any legal challenges to any of this legislation? Um,
Yes, I do. I'm also of the mind that there's a reason that they did it, to have this challenge and for it to go to the court system and to have that conversation played out at the Supreme Court level. I, I, I mean, it's good intended. In their mind, it's well, we're doing this for the great intention, for the greater good. Um, but we've seen what's happened here with these with these book bans and all this, and then I have a feeling that that's going to come back in another court case, and a court case is going to say yay or nay, and we'll see how far that goes. So short answer is yes. This will be challenged at some point.
but the success of that challenge is uh, a different issue entirely,
That's
depending on
correct.
how far it goes. And yeah. Um, so just a general comment in here says, doesn't removing material for dual credit students fundamentally alter the course and possibly to the point of making the course meaningless? Um, absolutely. And then
Yeah,
Christopher responds and says, not just that, but it out loud is saying that, dual credit students are not really college level if they can't handle that adult material.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, I'm able to also see the thread here, and I mean, Chris and Shauna are making very good points that no lawmaker has really thought of, and if they have, they didn't bring it up this time.
Mhm.
But you gotta. I mean, these are all very valid thoughts. That, well, if you've already broke the egg now, and the toothpaste is out of the tube, and now how do we deal with it? Um,
And speaking of that thread, it's mentioned potential accreditation issues. I know there was a um, bill that was, pushed forward to, I mean, essentially say that we no longer had to comply with SAC-COC, our accrediting body, and that we would even be potentially creating our own accrediting bodies. What was the status of that bill? I wasn't sure if it passed or not.
um, I think that one slipped by my close eye. I'll
Mm,
um I'll do a search on that and I will get back. I'll get back to y'all, because if
yeah.
if there's a thing that says we don't have to adhere to SACS and the COC, um, that's
It's going to be a problem.
yeah, that's quite telling.
It's because I'm seeing House Bill 1870 because this was the 89th legislature this year, right?
It was.
Yeah. So I'm seeing the text for House Bill 1870, and that was one of the concerns that, we've talked about in my courses where, we have certain things that SAC-COC requires us to do, which is now essentially many of these things have been made illegal for us to do, and that might cause accreditation issues. But for the tracking, I'm just seeing that it was introduced on 314,
Okay.
and that looks to be as far as it's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it got referred to the higher ed committee, and that's as far as it went.
Okay.
So
Couldn't
uh,
quite make it out there. Wasn't enough to really muster. So yeah. But
yeah.
that doesn't mean that that's going to be the end all be all. There's a very good chance that we could see it again in 2027.
Well, when I looked for it, I also saw it introduced in the 88th session.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
third time's the charm, I guess, maybe.
That's right.
How will Senate Bill 37 affect faculty councils that are open to all faculties, i.e., faculty are not elected to serve on the council?
Councils that are open to all faculty not elected to serve. Oh, um, so at South Plains College, you're technically elected if you volunteer to do it. Um, at least that's in my department. That's kind of how it was. Um, so you're technically elected, but you're not exactly elected. Like there wasn't some great campaign or anything like that. But SB 37 is going to say, look, I mean, it's gonna really just comply with all that.
Mhm.
It's gonna say, if you weren't really elected, well, okay, great, but now you're going to be considered elected if you're not appointed by the president.
Hey, Drew,
Uh,
this is Denise. So,
Hi.
hi. So I'm from Dallas College, and I just got off the rotation. I was the president at one of our campuses, and so we have a faculty association president at each campus, but everybody else is just a member. I don't mean just a member, but they're not on the council. How will that affect them? So they're limiting the members themselves to 60 now, including the presidents.
That's right. Yeah. So it's no longer like it cannot be larger than 60. 60 is the maximum.
Okay.
So it's and 30 of them will be appointed by your college or university president.
Thank you.
So the extra members that you may have there, that's what this SB 37 is going to do is essentially say, you figure out how you handle that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. That's a very good question. Someone asked me if I'm sorry, Jonathan, I want to jump to one thing.
yeah, go for it.
Someone asked me if it's Amanda Ritter Maggio. Will you personally be altering any material or activities in your course this fall as a result of this legislation? Okay, so I'll be teaching federal government this fall, and I'll have one Texas government course. It'll be an online course. My alterations um, will be none, except like keeping up with the times. Instead of doing elections, I'm going to, focus back on Congress and focus back on the courts and as far as like materials, I'm not going to have a lot of changes. What I talk about and the way I talk about it, that might be the case. So but there are just some things that you just have to talk about. And look, when we talk about the Texas legislature, I love legislatures. I find them so fascinating. But when we talk about the legislature and the last session and the session before then and this session, it begs us to ask the question, how did House Speaker Burrows and Lieutenant Governor Patrick get along when Lieutenant Governor Patrick and House Speaker Dade Phelan didn't get along? We have to analyze and evaluate these different personalities and their take on that. And why does it always seem that Dan Patrick has these constant problems, with House speakers? Is he the problem? I think that is a fair question to ask. And some may not feel that way, but I mean, but facts are facts, and I will always stand by the side of the fact that it's knowledge that we're doing, and I always open up my class to anybody in the public. You want to criticize me? Oh, you can come sit in my class. I haven't had anyone do that yet, but the opportunity's there. So I hope that answers your question, Amanda. That's a very, very good one.
Yeah, and we're seeing at the executive order level, someone popped in an order about the accreditation, which we were just talking about a minute ago. And someone said it appears that faculty councils or senates that do not meet the SB 37 standards will be abolished on September 1st, 2025. But I think we've got time for this one last question.
Sure.
And yes, we will be sharing the recording. I'll get it sent out. We're going to put it up on our channel, and then I'll be sending it to everyone who's been on the listserv. If you want to make sure that you don't get overlooked, here is my Texas State email. You can go ahead and email me and say, hey, I was here, give me a recording. But our final question here, so in terms of realpolitik, the targets here are obviously universities, which I certainly don't disagree with. What can we in the community college space do to help?
So I'm not quite sure what that is, but we're all part of it. I'm part of the junior and community college field as well. I think we're going to be subject to all of that. So even if we didn't have 60 members on our faculty senate, just whatever that it is, I mean, if we had 20, you can have less than 60. You just can't have more than 60. So if you had like 20 on your faculty senate, okay, 10 are going to be appointed by the president, 10 are going to be elected by your departments. I think the best thing that I always do this, and when it comes to the aspects of helping, is one, get registered to vote. Okay. Tell someone else to get registered to vote. Become a county voter registrar deputy. Well, deputy registrar, that's the term. And then register people to vote and then vote. This is, 2026 isn't far away, and we're going to have elections in this state, and so it's getting politically active is always the answer. So I mean, you can always contact your state lawmaker. You can find out why they voted this way. You can always ask them questions, go to town halls, call in on radio programs that they're on. I mean, just that's what you're going to have to really start to do here, and until we have an election and until you make your choice there. So I'm guessing that's what you're asking. And so if that was the case, then that's my answer.
All right. Well, we appreciate you being here to talk with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I definitely appreciate everyone turning out for this. We had a great turnout today. Is there anything you want to say to close before everybody heads out, Drew?
Sure. If you, I saw someone ask about slides. I put my email in the chat. If you would like those slides, I will happily email them to you. And I will get that for you there. So I do have a podcast. It's still all in the works, so let's just be honest here. So you can subscribe to it if you like. It's called The Outsider. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. I have my newsletters called the Outsider Newsletter. It's on Substack. You can find it there. So I appreciate y'all. Thank you, CASP, for asking me to be here. If you have any questions about anything, or if you want to follow up, you can, again, shoot me an email. You want to have a conversation, we can, go back and forth. I would love it. So, again, thank you for the time. Thank you all for being here. Thank you so much. It was an honor.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting.
Yes, thank you.
Sir, did you say that your email is in the chat or in the email?
It's in the chat.
In the chat. But I can also, if you would like, when I send out the email with the link to anyone who is here, if you email me or if you're just on the listserv, then I can put his information in that email when I send out the YouTube link with the recording.
Thank you, because I'm real slow taking notes on slides. Appreciate it. Thank you.
You are okay. Thank you all for being here.
Have a good afternoon.
This was great. Thank you so much, Jonathan and Cass, for scheduling Drew Landry. Drew, you were wonderful. Thank you.
Yep. And thank
Thank
you,
you, sir.
Elaine.
Thank you.